All right, hi everybody. John Meadows here, and today what we're going to talk about is recovery. Specifically seven reasons why you may not be recovering well. I have my notes here, so I might look down every once in a while to look at my notes. But the first thing I want to talk about is training. I think when we talk about recovery, people tend to think about sleep and stress and nutrition, and I'll get to those things. But I want to talk about recovery as it relates to training as well, because training has a huge impact on recovery, specifically how you're training and the types of fatigue that exist. And these are really, really important. So, pay attention to this. So just generally speaking, think about kind of two types of fatigue. Think about peripheral fatigue, which is just kind of local to your muscles. And think about, you always hear people talking about CNS fatigue, central nervous fatigue. Think about that as well. So first of all, our framework is, let's think about two types of fatigue. Now, the peripheral fatigue, again, specific to your muscles, like let's say you're training your biceps are going to experience peripheral fatigue. It's not a bad thing, because what happens is, as you're going through a set, muscle fibers will start to fatigue. So then also other muscle fibers will get caught into play. So what happens is you actually get maximal activation of all the fibers. So you always hear these people talking about high threshold motor units and all these things. But the key concept for you is, that's not a bad thing. When your muscle starts getting tired, more muscle fibers are going to have to be called into play to get engaged. Now, what you should learn from that, though, is you have to make your muscle fibers fatigued so that more are called into play, so you hit them all. This is why I'm 100% against this notion that you just need to do a little bit every single day. No, you actually need to load and exhaust your fibers. It's not just activate them, okay? Not a bad thing. Now let's think about central nervous system fatigue. So your brain, your spinal cord, they're sending these messages to your muscles. They're telling them to activate, to do something, to produce force, to be more specific. Now, depending on how you train, that can be impacted. And what can happen is you can have a reduction in the size of the signal that's sent from your brain, your spinal cord to your muscles. So let's say you're sending less of a signal to your muscles to work, then they're not going to be able to produce as much force. So they may actually fatigue before you've even called in to play the other muscle fibers. So you're not even getting maximal activation. You're not producing as much force. And this is when people get real frustrated. Have you ever been training and said, man, last week I did this for 10 reps. Now I can only do it for 8. If that happens over and over and over, like the 8 becomes 7, becomes 6, becomes 5, then you see this pattern, you should think to yourself, maybe there's some kind of fatigue here. And that means something not good is happening, okay? This directly impacts your recovery. You have to be able to recover to train at your best. So managing fatigue is going to be a big part of recovery. That's why I wanted to talk about it first and spend the most time on it. Now, there are specific things you do when you're training that cause central nervous system fatigue. Back when I was growing up, we used to always be told that the heavier movements were the ones where you're straining really hard, were the ones you're doing your heavy sets of 5 or 6. We were told that's what created central nervous system fatigue, but it wasn't true. There are actually other things that are causing central nervous system fatigue. Excessively high volumes is a big one. We always hear about volume being able to help with muscle growth, and it certainly does to an extent. But there's a level of volume when you start going beyond that is not good. You start accumulating that central nervous system fatigue, and this is why, when you're watching YouTube videos and you see people doing 6, 7 different exercises for biceps, 4 different exercises, 24, 30 sets, 40 sets for their biceps, like if you're training, like that's just too much. You don't need to do that. You could train harder and you could get more done in less time. So these excessive volumes, so you have to be careful with excessive volume, number one. The other one is high reps. Higher reps actually create a lot of central nervous system fatigue potentially as well too. And, we've had some great studies. Some were done by my friend Brad Schoenfeld, and Brad pointed out that now the science is showing that lighter weights can give you just as much muscle growth as heavier weights, provided that the lighter sets are taken to failure. And I am in agreement on that with Brad. But now you've got to put that into context. And Brad says this as well. Okay, so if I'm only going to lift with 40% of my 1 rep max, think about all the reps I have to do. So I've put up videos before where people said, John, you're going way too heavy. Haven't you seen the studies that you can do just as much with lighter weight? Yeah, but you know what? I don't want to do sets of 25 every single set I do. And I want you to think about this more. Let's go back to logic and common sense. Sometimes it's going to burn so bad you'll just stop. The fatigue is building, but you stop the set just because the burn is so bad. So you never even really hit failure. And this is kind of what I call the pump and fluff stuff. It's you got the lighter weight, which I don't have a problem with as long as you can take it to failure, but people have a hard time taking it to failure just because it burns so bad. And that's actually one of the things I thought I did a pretty good job of through my bodybuilding career is if I did back off on the amount of weight I was lifting, I could work through that pain and really push myself. But it's not realistic to expect everybody to be able to go take those light weights to absolute failure. Now, what happens when you do that is you're creating greater aerobic demand. And that's why you're probably seeing this central nervous system fatigue. So if your sets are just high reps, high volumes, high reps all the time. I'm not saying a set of high reps is bad, but a large proportion of high reps, high volumes, that's going to have a big impact. Volume, reps. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention is rest. Another way to accumulate a lot of central nervous system fatigue is simply not resting between your sets. When you rest, that peripheral fatigue that sets in local to the muscle, your muscle can recover fairly quickly. But sometimes it's the central nervous system that hasn't recovered. So if you do a set and you don't rest long enough, then that signal, again, going from your brain and your spinal cord to your muscles, it's not as strong. So you can't do as many reps. And you think, the muscle's just tired. Maybe it's not just the muscle being tired. Maybe it's just the signal getting to the muscle fibers isn't as strong, so you don't get as good at contractions. And that's not good. Again, that means you don't get activation and exhaustion of all the fibers. You don't even get the activation of all the fibers. So what I tell people is be careful about resting for very short periods of time because it can also cause you to have this central nervous system fatigue. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have short rest breaks at certain periods of time. If you look at the way I structure programming, some of the single joint exercises, I don't rest for a long period of time. Like, let's say I'm doing a concentration curl. Certain exercises, if you do a concentration curl on your left bicep, you don't need to wait 3 minutes to do it again. But if you're doing a squat, you might need to rest 3 minutes before you do it. So it's common sense. So, I've heard people say, well, all the studies are saying we need to rest for 3 minutes between sets. Put that into context of training. On the really difficult exercises, you may need to rest for 3 minutes. But for some exercises, you don't need 3 minutes, okay? So be careful with going too fast. Be careful with doing too many reps, and be careful with excessive volumes. Now, the one final thing I would say is compound movements, again, just because of all the muscle that's working, and potentially you're breathing harder, greater aerobic demand can also create central nervous system fatigue. So, doing 10 sets of squats is probably going to create a lot more potential for that fatigue as doing 4 sets of squats and 6 sets of single joint exercises. So what I'm saying is the way you design your program itself can create a problem with recovery, because if you have this central nervous system fatigue as a result of how you've designed your program, you're not going to be able to recover, okay? So just want you to keep that in mind, the way you design your programs. If you're listening, there's some tips in there you could pull out in terms of your program design. That would be number 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to say the volume that you're training with, the repetitions that you're using, and the rest periods that you're using. We'll say that's 1, 2, and 3. All right. You all saw Brain Twister, but we've improved it. What are we doing now?
Brain Twister's Revenge.
Brain Twister's Revenge. Okay. Okay, on to number 4, And I hope you enjoyed that yo-yo trick. A lot more are coming. Number 4, sleep. So I've got several comments. Why are you not mentioning sleep? I have mentioned sleep in a lot of videos I've already done, but I'll mention it again. Sleep is obviously very critical to recovery. If you don't sleep, you don't recover. You have excessively high cortisol levels. You have all kinds of bad things going. Now, let me just give you a quick, very, very quick lesson here on sleep. So if you look on this left side, this was for another video I did for my website. If you look here on this left side, you sleep in sleep cycles through the night. Every sleep cycle is about 90 minutes. So most people will get, you hope you get 5 sleep cycles, maybe even 6. Early in the night, when you go to bed, your sleep cycles tend to be very dominant, and the non-REM phase tends to be very dominant. And then you have a shorter REM phase. So like in this first 90-minute sleep cycle, it's mostly non-REM, then it's a little bit of REM sleep. And then as you progress through the night, the early into the morning, the non-REM phase, you can see here, is smaller, and the REM phase is much larger. Now, why does that matter? The non-REM phase of sleep is what allows your body to physically recover. That's when you're producing growth hormone and all kinds of cool stuff. There's all kinds of things happening to maintain your blood sugar and all kinds of good stuff. The REM phase is more the mental cognition, memory, all those kinds of things. So if you're not sleeping, particularly if you're going to bed really, really late and getting up early, particularly if you're going to bed really, really late, you're missing out on a lot of those large blocks of non-REM sleep, which help with recovery. So make sure you're getting to bed at a decent hour. And, if you go to bed later, but you get up later, that's probably okay too. I just like to see people get a good 7-8 hours. I know people can do okay on shorter rest periods, but if you look up sleep deprivation, go look it up on PubMed, and you'll see a host of issues, blood sugar issues, diabetes, heart disease, all kinds of things that that can potentially stem from not sleeping enough. And just on a side note, if you think about when you're sleep deprived, like you feel terrible. Like that's the worst feeling in the world. Like your body physically feels like it's melting. You feel terrible. Sleep deprivation is the ultimate torture technique in my book. If somebody ever captured me and I was a prisoner and they withheld sleep, I would crack in a heartbeat. I'll tell you anything you want to know. I'll tell you all the secrets that you want to know. Just let me take a nap. All right, so sleep. That was number 4. Number 5, I've talked about this a lot too, but it definitely has a lot to do with recovery, and that's simply your nutrition. From the very basic standpoint of getting in the calories you need, getting in enough protein, getting in enough carbohydrates. I'm a fan of balanced macronutrient profiles for diets. I don't like anything that completely excludes carbohydrates, completely excludes fats. I think if you want to do those things for a very short period of time, if you have a specific goal in mind, or maybe you have a medical issue you're trying to treat, so you've lowered your carbohydrates for those reasons, I get that. But I think to expect someone to go low carb as just a way of life is difficult for most people. Same thing with no fat. I think that's potentially very harmful to have really, really low fat levels in your diet. So number 1, I prefer a balanced macronutrient profile. So enough protein, enough carbs, enough fat. Now, the carbohydrates are going to, let's talk about the nutrition around your training. So the carbohydrates are going to cause your body to produce insulin, your pancreas to be more specific. Insulin helps manage cortisol. It helps manage muscle protein breakdown. This will allow you to recover faster. If you don't believe me, that's okay, but I want you to try an experiment. Put all your nutrition, if you don't think nutrient timing works, that's okay. Put all your nutrition away from your training, okay? So let's say you train in the morning. Let's say you train at lunchtime at work. I don't want you to eat in the morning. And you can go ahead and you can eat your 2 meals at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Get your calories in. Take notes on how you feel. Take notes on how you recover. Then I want you to take the same amount of calories and I want you to allocate them around training. Eat some before you train, have a little intra while you train, have a good meal after you train. Do the same thing. Take notes on how you feel, how you recover. If you're training hard, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to notice a big difference in your recovery. The things that you do around the nutrition that you consume around training is a very big deal. Now, I know a lot of people like to train fasted. I'm okay with that as long as it's in the morning and you had a big dinner. So if you have a big dinner, a lot of that glucose has been converted to glycogen, it's sitting in your muscles, and you can train in the morning on a little bit less nutrition. But even then, I would still say afterwards, you better get some nutrition in, or even during. Again, this is for people who train hard. If you don't train hard, you can kind of just do whatever. But if you train really hard and you're demanding energy, guess what? Carbohydrates are a great source of fuel, okay? So make sure that you're eating, in my opinion, enough calories. Make sure it's a balanced macronutrient profile, and make sure you're eating a lot of nutrition around your training to support recovery. Also, the protein obviously is going to help with muscle protein synthesis. All right. So adequate protein to me are very important around your workouts. Number 6, I've mentioned this before as well, stress. Stress simply drives cortisol levels. Cortisol breaks down muscle potentially if it's constantly elevated. Short-term elevations in cortisol, not a big deal. Constantly elevated cortisol is a big deal. It absolutely will zap you. It'll create a lot of muscle protein breakdown that's hard to recover from. And remember, just the basic principle of gaining muscle is having more protein synthesis than muscle protein breakdown. So all the things that you're doing to encourage muscle protein breakdown, they better be outweighed by a lot of muscle protein synthesis. So if you can manage the muscle protein breakdown by doing things such as nutrition around your training, which I mentioned earlier, getting enough sleep and so forth, but managing your stress. So managing your stress, I've talked about it before. I think it's worth repeating though. A lot of the things that you think are big deals, probably not a big deal. So before you have a strong emotional response and you get really upset about something, just take a second and pause and think, is this a big deal? Is this going to matter a month from now, 6 months from now? Most of the stuff won't. Now, there are some things that do. Some things are a big deal. You know, you're losing your job. That is a big deal. That will affect you. So I completely get the stress that you're feeling there. But people get stressed out about things like not getting enough likes on their Instagram, or they only got in. I saw somebody yesterday mention that they got 10 grams less of protein for one of their meals, and was it a big deal? And so there's a lot of little things that people get stressed about. I'm like, man, it's okay. It's all right. So manage stress. When you find yourself feeling angry all the time, or if you're depressed, identify that, be self-aware, and know that you're in that state, and try to get out of that state. Try to do something that makes you feel better. Try to do something that's more directed towards working toward a goal. Work on your social connections to get out of it. Call your friends, talk to your friends, hang out with your friends actually in real life and not just on the phone. And I think that'll help as well. All right. So that's number 6. Okay. Number 7, you're not laughing enough. You got to lighten up. You got to have some fun. There are actually studies on PubMed that talk about this. Look up, what did I type in? Laughter medicine or something like that. You'll see that there's actually some studies on this. You can laugh because of external stimuli. So like you're watching a movie that's funny or something like that. There's a lot of studies on that. Or there's this other kind of where you make yourself laugh. I think that's kind of creepy. That kind of made me think of the Joker movie. But so there's, this self-initiated laughing where you just laugh. They actually have this yoga laughter classes in England or India. So maybe my friends in India can comment if they've ever taken a yoga class that has laughter built into it. So you'll laugh and then you belly breathe. I was reading about this. And it actually was lowering people's blood pressures in the studies I was looking at, which I thought was pretty interesting. And again, the external stimuli, watching something funny, something like that. So what are they seeing in these studies? I I think the field needs to develop a little bit more, but in some of them, they're seeing lowered cortisol levels. And in some cases, it was just while they were watching a movie. In some cases, it actually carried over to lower cortisol levels throughout the day. So, and just in general, just think about it, common sense. When you're laughing, you feel better. You know, laughter is actually a little bit of an analgesic. It's actually a little bit of a pain reliever. So in addition to the cortisol, maybe what you do is when you're in the middle of a really hard set, this could be a fun little video challenge. I want you to just start laughing. See if it makes some of the pain go away. I don't know. I've never tried that. Maybe I'll try that. So anyways, try to laugh more. It'll just give you a better life too. All right. So those are your 7 reasons. I hope that some of those can help you out, help you recover better. The better you can recover, the harder you can train, the more you can train to recover from, the faster your results are going to be. Plain and simple. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.